So those are 10 books that I consider my all-time favorites. I'm dying to know if you've read any of these and if you agree that they are favorites. Maybe they don't make your top 10 list, but I don't know, top 20, top 50? Let me know in the comments down below. Hello and welcome to the BookTube channel, Jack and the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide variety of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. I have been making BookTube videos for about 2 years now. My first video was posted on January 21st, 2022. It was an ode to The Count of Monte Cristo. I talked about how I annotated it. I think I covered some quotes and also some little known facts about the book. Since then, I have consistently posted 2 videos a week. Okay, some of them are unlisted now, so if you fact check me, you won't see all those videos, but I'm playing the algorithm game. So I unhide some of the unpopular ones, and I also don't want to make it too overwhelming for viewers when they go and look at my videos page. To celebrate this milestone, I figured it was about time I do a top 10 favorite books of all time video. I haven't done this yet because it's really hard to narrow down my favorite books to only 10. And when I'm looking at the list, I kind of feel like a basic bookworm. I wish I had some lesser known, really edgy books in this top 10, but I feel like these popular books are popular for a reason, and I can't help the fact that I love them. And when I look at some of those edgier books that are kind of favorites, the lesser known ones, they don't topple some of these heavyweights, in my opinion. So these are 10 of my favorites. They're in no particular order except for number 1. So I tried to just mix up the genres to keep it spicy, but don't put too much weight into the ranking of these. Let's start out with the book in the number 10 slot. That goes to The Shining, a horror book written by Stephen King. I have read this twice. I actually featured this in a video where I talked about how to annotate Stephen King because on my reread I did annotate it and had a lot of fun doing that. This book scared the pee out of me. It was so scary. Reading this home alone at night was just not a good idea. But I love an isolated cabin or mansion setting. So this book featuring an isolated hotel in a snowstorm was like my perfect atmosphere. And the fact that there's like hauntings going on and possession stuff going on and a really creepy 5-year-old really all was like a formula for success for me. And also what I really like about this book is the father in it, Jack, and how he really struggles with the abuse cycle. So when he was a kid, how his father treated him and how that is coming through in how he treats his son, especially as he spirals into madness being at this haunted hotel. There are 3 of them. The mother, father, and kid are the only ones there, but it doesn't mean they're alone. And the hedge animals are like the creepiest thing. I cannot stop thinking about those things. They were completely awful. It is exactly those creative, horrific elements paired with the psychological elements that the father is going through that solidifies The Shining as a favorite book of all time for me. Coming in at number 9 for my favorite books of all time is My Dark Vanessa, a literary fiction by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This book holds the title as the most disturbing book that I have ever read. And fun fact, but the book review video that I did on this book remains my most watched video on the channel. I consistently get views on this, even to this day, even though I posted it almost 2 years ago. My Dark Vanessa is a very dark tale. We have 2 timelines. In the earlier timeline, we have a 15-year-old girl named Vanessa, and this is about how she is groomed by her English teacher, a grown man, he's in his 40s, and how she is manipulated into thinking she's giving consent for a relationship. And it is so fascinating and scary to watch how this unfolds. And there's a lot of things, I even tabbed it, ways that I could relate to Vanessa and understand why she was in this position, how he made her feel special, how he preyed on her insecurities, and how she was uncomfortable with a lot of things going on, but she would like talk herself into it. Like, it was just so wild. So that's the previous timeline. And then we have like a present day timeline, present day being 2017. She's an adult, and how the consequences of this relationship have followed her through to adulthood. And she doesn't see herself as a victim, how she sees her relationship now, especially now that something has happened to this teacher and more of his story has come to light, how that changes her perspective. It's just a really interesting insight, and it's also very terrifying. But I think this is such an important book, and I don't have any children, but if I had a daughter, if I had like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, I would really encourage her to read this book, because I think it puts an interesting spin on things and gives you a whole new perspective of a lot of things that I think we will encounter throughout our lives. Technically, I should give you trigger warnings for this book since it's about an underage relationship, but the whole book is triggering. The point of reading it is to be triggered. And you know what? I myself was triggered because very recently, like in the past month for my YouTube video on this, someone actually commented that they thought this was a romance, and they thought it was a sweet romance about an unconventional relationship. And I was screaming at my laptop screen because I'm like, you just don't get it. This is not a romance. It is not a romance. It is not a sweet story. It is about manipulation and bad influence and the idea of consent. It is not a romance. So you can tell I'm getting heated. I'm getting heated. The point of reading this book is to be triggered, but it is so important, and that is why it is a favorite book of mine. Let's lighten things up a little bit with the book in my number 8 slot. All Roads Lead Here is a contemporary romance written by Mariana Zapata. It's almost unfair to call this book a contemporary romance because it is such a slow burn. That's what Mariana Zapata is known for, that slow burn romance that doesn't really kick in until like the last 20% of the book. It reads more like a literary fiction to me, but this really captures emotions of just leaving it all behind and starting over. In a small town, in a mountain setting. Like, these are all things that I love. In this one, we follow Aurora, who is reinventing herself, and she's moving back to the small town that she lived in for a brief time with her mother, before her mother went missing. So this has a great reflection of a mother-daughter relationship and the grief that Aurora feels over losing her mother. She's trying to reconnect with her by doing all these hikes in Colorado that her mom used to love. And so it's very beautiful, an exploration of that relationship and the grief. But of course, it's that relationship she has with her landlord, Rhodes, who is a grump. He's not an a-hole, though. He just really likes the secluded life. He just wants to be a dad to his teenage son and do his park ranger job and live his life. And so when she comes stumbling in and disrupting things in her very energetic, cheerful way, he is disturbed. But it's adorable. I love their banter and their interactions. And even though I wouldn't be thrilled to read a teenager in a story, I actually really, really like the kid in this book. He's so sweet and shy and introverted, but he has a passion for music that he connects with Aurora on. And I love the unconventional family structure in this book as well. I forced this book on so many people. Johanna recently read this, another booktube channel that I love. I encouraged her to read this. I made my cousin read this when I annotated a copy of it for her birthday, and she really enjoyed it. So I really push this on so many people, but again, go into it with expectations, not necessarily of like a steamy romance, but more of like a literary fiction about reinventing yourself and found family and just creating a new wholesome life for yourself. For number 7 on the list, this slot goes to Rebecca, a classic mystery written by Daphne du Maurier. Talk about epic atmosphere. I loved this book when I first read it. I ate it up, and I've read it like another 2 or 3 times since then. But this is about an unnamed narrator who falls in love with Maxim, and they go to live at his estate called Manderley. But married bliss is short-lived because this place is creepy, and so is the main servant, or I don't know what her title is, Mrs. Danvers, like the maid or the one who takes care of the estate. Between her and the estate itself, so much creepy stuff is going on because our narrator knows that Maxim has been married before and the memory of his previous wife has not left the estate. Manderley is a place that I could visualize. When I read this, I felt like I was there with these big rooms and these halls and the cove and the little shack by the cove and her little morning room or writing room. I felt like I was there, and one of the biggest tragedies in my life is that I cannot be at Manderley myself because it's a fictional place, but I just wish I could see it for myself. But actually, anytime I read this, I feel like I can see it for myself. So it is the atmosphere of this book, the creepiness of it, that makes it one of my favorite all-time reads. On to number 6 on the list, which is A Man Called Ove, a literary fiction written by Frederick Bachman. This is very reminiscent of the movie Up because we feature a cranky old man who lost his wife and he just wants to be left alone. But he has a bunch of quirky neighbors that are super over-the-top friendly that just want to talk to him and be his friend. And there's a cat that kind of embodies that vibe as well. And as we learn more about Ove, what he's been through in his life, his relationship with his wife, and the very deep love that they shared, oh my gosh, I am so connected with this character. There's something about like a cranky old man with a heart of gold that just gets to me. That it's absolutely amazing. I sobbed in this book. It just got to me so hard, just like the movie Up. Actually, Up is a horrible movie because you're sobbing in like the first 5 minutes. But this really captures a lot of those same elements, but so much better. I mean, books are always better than the movie, even though these aren't the same story. This is so fantastic. There's some people that have read it that really didn't like it because they didn't like Ove. They thought he was too big of an a-hole. And like, I can see that, but that's the point. The point is you can't always judge first impressions or like initial impressions. Getting to know someone is really important because when you learn how sacrificing he is, it is just amazing. He is just an epic, epic character. The number 5 favorite book of all time that I want to talk about is The Kiss Quotient, a contemporary romance written by Helen Hoang. Really, why this book is on the list is because it changed me as a person and opened up my mind more to the world and a whole group of people that I didn't understand before. If you like the movie Pretty Woman, you will enjoy this. This is about Stella, who works in statistics, I think. She's incredibly smart, incredibly professionally successful. She has a lot of money because she's good at her job. She also has autism, and so she doesn't understand social norms. Things have to be explained to her, and she tries really hard to fit in with what she thinks is expected of her. Well, she's a little bit awkward when it comes to relationships, so she decides to hire a male escort named Michael to teach her about the bedroom and ultimately about dating and relationships so that she can like study it to try to be normal. And so this is the story of them. That's where you get that kind of Pretty Woman, that reverse Pretty Woman kind of vibe, right? I loved learning about Stella. I loved how Michael understood her and different elements. Like, she would explain that clothing makes her really uncomfortable. Like, the tags on clothing would really irritate her skin. So he really shops around for finding materials and fits and clothing without tags that will fit her body and make her feel comfortable. And it's all these things, and learning how she sees the world really helped open my mind to the experience of others. And for that, I am so grateful to this book, and I have to call this a favorite. The book in the number 4 slot for my favorite books of all time is one of the books where I feel like a basic bookworm for saying this is a favorite. That's because the book is A Court of Silver Flames, a fantasy romance by Sarah J. Maas. I know the book talkers and the romantasy readers go crazy over the ACOTAR series. So that's why I say that I feel like a basic bookworm by loving this book as much as I do and putting it on my favorites list. Okay, but listen. I know the series is not perfect. It absolutely has its faults. ACOTAR was the first fantasy book that I read. Yes, fantasy romance, but the first fantasy book I read that really opened the door to the genre for me. But this one in particular lands its spot on the list because Sarah J. Maas is so good at writing her female main characters at their absolute lowest point. This book really is about depression, and this is Nesta's book, the sister. I'm not going to tell you about the plot because you probably already know what ACOTAR's about, and even if you don't, I don't want to ruin this book, which is later in the series. But I hated this character in all the other books, could not stand her. I procrastinated reading this because I hated her so much. But within the first couple pages, definitely the first few chapters, I completely changed my mind and I read this whole book in 2 weekdays. I couldn't put it down. I was so invested in Nesta's journey and I felt like I understood her so much. And yes, she is a B word of a character. She is awful to everyone around her that has the best of intentions. And that's why I hated her so much. But reading her perspective, I understood her. I got it. And I actually saw myself a lot in her in some different aspects. And so I was so invested in her journey and what she went through. Is this even a perfect book? No. A lot about the ending I take issue with. But for how much this changed my mind when I was so certain that I hated her, for the journey and how invested I was in her getting out of her depression, this has to be on this list. The book that is in the number 3 slot for my favorite books of all time is Maybe in Another Life, a literary fiction by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Taylor Jenkins Reid has a lot of heavy hitter books that people love, but this one is my personal favorite. It's not so much of a romance, although it might be classified as one, but really what was special to me about this one is the concept of fate and different directions your life can take. So this story follows our main character named Hannah Martin. Yes, I had to check because I already forgot. And she goes back home. Her life is kind of in an upheaval at this point in time. So she goes back home and she goes out with her best friend, lifelong best friend. And they go out and they run into an old flame of hers. And she's faced with a decision. She can either go home with him, kind of go with her heart and go home with him, or stay strong and say no and go home with her friend. The book then breaks out in storylines, not different timelines because it's the same timeline, but following her on these 2 paths based on what decision she made. So it's one of those concepts that I find really interesting. Like, how would my life have been different if I made one decision differently? I think about that all the time. I don't know if you guys do, but I always think about that. And so that was a really interesting exploration along with what things stayed the same or what would be considered fate. And actually the strongest relationship in this book I think was really with her best friend. I love the friendship between these two. So if you love like stories about female friendships, this is an absolutely great one. But I also like the theme of there's a lot of different paths to happiness and there's a lot of ways to get there. And that was really like a feel-good theme to explore, as well as like interesting plot, great character development as we see her on these 2 different paths. And I read this book years ago, but it sticks with me and I think about it all the time. Number 2 on the list, but remember these ones are in no particular order, so I just have to put that disclaimer back out there. But the book in the number 2 slot is And Then There Were None, a classic mystery by Agatha Christie. I love a closed circle, isolated mystery, and this is the one that started it all. We have like 12 characters that were all brought to this estate on an island, very isolated, for different reasons. They're all there for different reasons. And the first night there, a recording plays with a voice accusing each one of them of a crime. And then they are all unalived one by one until there are none. It is a fantastic mystery. And because you don't know if it's one of them, is it one of the 12, is someone else on the island? And oh my gosh, it is so interesting. Along with like these characters that are all accused of a crime, like are they even good people? Are you even upset that they're you know, being unalived? I don't know. But the concept of that isolated closed circle is such a fascinating one to me. And I think the first time I read this, that really unlocked that love for me. Along with the twist of who did it, which totally caught me off guard. I don't know if you might guess it if you read this for the first time, but you have to understand, like, this was the first of its kind. Agatha Christie was the OG of mystery. And I think a lot of other books have kind of capitalized on this plot. So I don't know if you will be as shocked by the whodunit, but I read this earlier on in my mystery reading journey, and so I was floored. So it's the atmosphere, the ambiance, the characters, and when you read this, all the characters are introduced like right away, so it's hard to kind of keep track. So I recommend actually like putting a bookmark in that page so you can refer back, because I definitely had to a couple times. But so good, so good. This is a perfect book. It's time for the last book on this list, number 1, and this is the only one that I would say is ranked, because I would say this book without a doubt is my favorite book of all time. The Count of Monte Cristo, a classic by Alexander Dumas. All roads lead to Monte. I said this was my first video I did on BookTube, and that's because it's my favorite book. And nothing has topped this. I mean, the tabs in it, you can see I had a lot of reactions. I put a lot of thought into this. And I think what I love about this the most is how satisfying this is. Obviously, this is the epic revenge story. Other revenge stories wish they could be this awesome, because this really is how it's done. Now, I could say it's a perfect book, but it is very, very bloated and lengthy. That's because it was published over the course of 2 years in kind of like a magazine or a newspaper. So Alexander Dumas was paid by like how long he could make this story. And it definitely feels like that. But even scenes where I thought, like, why are we doing this? This doesn't make sense. This isn't part of the story. It all comes together, and that's what makes it so satisfying. It is so, the crime against our main character is so horrific because he's falsely imprisoned in this really awful, awful place. But what he learns there, the life lessons he gets there, really, I don't know, kind of make it worthwhile. And how he reinvents himself into the Count of Monte Cristo and throughout his revenge journey. And it is so well thought out. It is so strategic. It is so brilliant. It is delightfully cruel to these people that deserve it for falsely imprisoning him. So good, so good. And then you have the exploration of Edmond Dantes, our main character, and the struggles he has at one point of like, am I playing God? Am I doing too much? Do I have a right to do this? Even though I was horrifically wronged and my life was thrown off course, do I have a right to do this? Really, really good. One tip I have for readers that are going to be checking this out for the first time is I want to say that Edmond Dantes is a master of disguise. So if you are reading a scene and you're not sure how this applies to the greater story, consider if maybe it's Edmond Dantes in disguise. Because like I think that was supposed to be obvious to readers, and it wasn't always obvious to me, and until I checked like Spark Notes, and I was like, oh, that was it. Okay, that makes it a lot more interesting. That's one piece of advice I have for you. And the other piece is to check out that video that I did, that I mentioned, my first video that I ever did, because I have some interesting facts about this book, such as, did you know this was based on a true story? This book is an investment of time, but it is so very much worth it. So those are 10 books that I consider my all-time favorites. I'm dying to know if you've read any of these and if you agree that they are favorites. Maybe they don't make your top 10 list, but I don't know, top 20, top 50? Let me know in the comments down below, because I cannot shut up about any of these books. Thank you so much for an incredible 2 years here on BookTube. It has been such an experience, and I love talking to all you guys about the different books that we read. Thank you so much for tuning in to this video. I will see you in the next one.